Hello and welcome to this video. Today we have the great privilege to have Eric onto the channel to talk about his Christian walk and also his project about helping people win the now. Eric is a triathlete, dentist, author, and speaker, and we're very grateful to have him onto the channel to talk about his current projects and his Christian life. So to get started off, we would like to start a tradition on this channel with starting off with a quick fire question. So are you looking forward to this interview, Eric?
I'm excited. Let's get after it.
Brilliant. Where did you grow up?
Pella, Iowa.
What's one thing that most changed your life?
Probably the moment I found out I didn't have to have a colostomy.
That's interesting. I'm sure we'll get back to that later. I mean, that's the brilliance about quickfire questions. It shocks you and then you're like, how do we go from there? Yeah. What's the best country you've visited?
Turks and Caicos.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. What's your toughest challenge yet?
The year 2021.
Ooh. Talent or hard work?
Hard work.
Brilliant. Can everyone get burnt out?
No.
That's an answer I didn't expect. Describe your relationship with Jesus in 3 words.
Oh boy. Dependence, love, and presence.
And finally, describe the WintheNow program with 3 words.
Live life present.
Brilliant. So as you know from these, or as you can tell from these 3 quick fire questions, we are going to be talking about a wide range of issues, which I can't wait to get into with Eric today. So let's start off with talking about your Christian walk, because we are a Christian and philosophy channel. So we would like to start off with just perhaps telling us a bit more about yourself, a bit more about your journey for people who might not know you as well.
Yeah, so I have one of those typical grew up in a Christian home stories, but I didn't make faith my own, and I was fighting a secret battle of I was bullied when I was in my early formative years in elementary school and was told that I wasn't good enough to participate in some of the things we did at recess over the lunch hour. And so when you're told that over time, you can choose to believe that. So I really believed that I wasn't good enough and that I had to overcompensate and be the absolute best at everything I could possibly be, because I had to prove to people that I was that way. Fast forward until I was in dental school, and we had some friends when I was in Iowa City at the University of Iowa. We had some friends that asked if we'd like to help lead this local youth group for 7th and 8th graders, 13, 14-year-olds. And I really didn't want to do it because I was very busy with dental school. But really, the first night that we went there, my wife and I agreed to help. And we heard these kids that were just on fire for Jesus, on fire for the Lord. And one of the things that they were sharing was, it was called Yay Gods. So, yay God, because you did this in my life. Yay God, because of this. And the depth of their faith just blew me away. And I was immediately attracted to it. And that was the start of me making faith my own and not just standing on the shoulders of my parents' faith when I was growing up.
That's a really brilliant introduction. So perhaps were there any things which specifically stood out to you from those youth groups that you've led, which personally helped you transform your relationship with Christ? Because I grew up in a Christian family as well, but there were certain periods in life where I met Christians, both in a positive and also in a negative way, which then transformed my outlook towards Christianity and transformed my relationship with Christ. So I was wondering whether there's any few moments which perhaps stood out to you in this process.
Yeah, I think one of the things was definitely the youth group leader, a guy named Doug Schillinger. And what Doug was able to do is just not only be an adult, he could lead, he could teach in the church to the whole body of believers, but he could also find a way to make faith simple. And I think that was a huge lesson for me, that Jesus commanded us to come to him as little children. And what we do is really complicate our faith. So the Bible was written for illiterate people who could only hear the word, and they had to, these were uneducated, illiterate people. So I make it way too complicated. And that's one of the things that frustrates me about Christianity, is that we make it way too complicated. we split hairs on things that are non-salvation issues. So I loved how simple he made it, and I tried to build my faith off the simplicity of abiding in Jesus. That's really what he asks us to do. He wants his heart. He wants our heart. And from there, he really doesn't need us to do things for him. He needs us to be with him and have an open attitude that whatever he wants us to do, we're willing to serve however he wants us to do that.
That's a very brilliant presentation, and I have to say, one of those people that you're probably accusing of being too complex is probably, I have to say, I'm guilty of that sometimes. I mean, as a student of philosophy and theology at Oxford, sometimes I have the tendency to go crazy on the end of complicated stuff, but oftentimes, and I have to thank my mother a lot for this, she always reminds, hey, look at all those things if you want. You could do all those things as philosophical pursuit for fun, but it has to come down to those basics, how you impact others with your relationship with Christ. And perhaps talking about that relationship with Christ a bit more, how has your relationship with Christ impacted your life, and how did your development in your Christian faith impact the way you approach different issues?
Yeah, so it's impacted everything. And to step back, Josh, just a little bit to what you had said about that, I'm all for deep theological and philosophical discussions. I think those are great. I think they're a great way to form community around like-minded believers and challenge each other. So I think they're great. I think just at the end of the day, we do need to remember that the salvation issues, the things that Jesus really taught us about in his commandments, are really the bedrock. And so some of those other things, while they're great academic pursuits and we can certainly learn a lot from them, those can be divisive as well. But as far as how my Christian faith plays out, it plays out in everything that I do. I do a lot of speaking, especially about burnout. And I don't have to necessarily mention my faith. A lot of times I'll be speaking to businesses, and that's not what they want me to talk about. But if you listen, the message is there. My heart is there in how I speak and how I share. My heart is there in how I relate to my patients in my dental practice. If it was not for relationships and loving people well, I wouldn't be a dentist anymore. That's the part that really means a lot to me, is meeting people right where they are and then trying to be a part of the good part of their story. So that's a huge thing I want to do. I want to do that when I coach people. I want to do that with my team, the people who work for me. And I think that we are better together. So when we support each other and we live in community together, then that's really what Jesus wanted us to do. He wasn't by himself when he was here on earth. Of course, he stepped away to have time with his Father, but he was around his inner circle, his disciples. So I think that being in community, COVID told us that we had to be isolated and we had to be away from everyone. And for a season, that's what we had to do. But I think a lot of people have stayed there. And it's really important that we are together and we are in groups of believers.
Yes, I think that's a very important thing, and perhaps developing upon that a bit more. When I was looking at your profile and the accomplishments you've done and what you've worked on in the past, being a dentist, triathlete, all these different things. Someone might look at that and say, well, that's just really successful, especially in our success and results-driven world that we have today. I was just wondering how perhaps your approach to trying to tick all those boxes off to say I was a very good dentist, a really good triathlete, all these things. How has the Christian life, I suppose, impacted your approach to what you count as success, achievement, and also fulfillment?
Yeah, well, I got it wrong for most of my life. And it's really been within the last several years. I was in Colorado and I was hiking a 14,000 foot peak called Mount Princeton. And I got to the top of that mountain, and the beauty of creation was just stunning. I looked around and could see as far as the eye could see. It was all created by God and all created in his grace that we could enjoy it. But what I really felt in my soul was this thought of, if you don't know why you're climbing the mountain, you're not going to know the answer when you get to the top. And so I had been chasing so many things just for the sake of chasing them, just for the sake of proving to people that I was amazing. And in that moment, I started to step back and say, okay, why am I chasing at this level? What am I chasing after? Am I ever going to find what I'm actually looking for in all these accomplishments and all of these checking the boxes, as you said? And the reality is that I probably wasn't going to, if as soon as I got to the top of a mountain, I was thinking, what's the next mountain? What's the next thing? It's just taking some time and enjoying that view and that accomplishment.
I mean, what you say is, I guess, quite applicable to my life as well, in some sense, where I also find myself sometimes always going through the motions, trying to achieve more, pushing myself more, driving myself more. And I guess one of the things I would like to ask you is, what are some tips or things which have come to you through your experience, through going through that process, to kind of slow yourself down? Because sometimes it's very tempting to just say, okay, I've done this, I want to do something else, I want to chase something more. What are some tips in which you can really slow yourself down, I guess?
Yeah. It's a challenge. It's a challenge because I'm guessing that a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are what I would call high achievers. We want to accomplish things. We want to check things off, and that is fine and it's good. I've had a lot of success in my life because I have been driven and because I have been focused on that. But again, going back to that, if we don't know why we're climbing the mountain, we're not going to find the answer at the top. The important thing is, why are we climbing? Why are we chasing? Why are we achieving? So spending some time and understanding what our why is. So one of my big whys is I seek to make an impact for the kingdom that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. So I want to leave a big ripple effect. And that's part of why I have added coaching and speaking to my dental practice. So I see patients in my office 3 days a week. And now on Thursdays and Fridays, I work on creating content for social media, blogs and newsletters. I work on keynotes. I work on workshops to give people to help them overcome burnout, to help them live present in their own lives. So, because I want to leave a bigger impact than what I can do in my dental practice. And I feel that if God has given me a big message, then I need to be obedient in putting it out there so that it can reach a large number of people as He wants it to.
That's a very brilliant presentation of kind of your drive and how you want to integrate Christianity into your practice and what you do. I suppose developing on that a bit more, when I was asking you some 3 words to describe your relationship with Christ, and dependence was one of them. How does that dependence on Christ show through these actions, and how do you, I guess, when you're thinking about doing Christian related actions or projects, how do you then tie that back to your dependence on Christ? Because some people might think about this and go, well, okay, if you're doing something Christian related, it surely is dependent on Christ. But from my experience, sometimes you might want to be doing something which is seemingly Christian, but actually you're relying on your own strength, or you're trying to do it with some other form of motivations behind it, but it's not fully and 100% dependent on Christ. How do you kind of separate those two together, and how do you emphasize that dependence on Christ?
Yeah, one of the biggest things and habits that I have to be in my life is I need times of silence. It goes against everything that our society says, our bigger, faster, more society. Even Jesus stepped away and needed time alone in quiet with His Father. So it's something that there is always a huge resistance to in my life, because I still struggle with the performance. But I know I need that quiet, because I need time to discern, okay, God, what do you want me to do next? And then also for Him to pull me back when I'm chasing down something that is not what He wants for me. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to say, I want this, I want this, I want this, and to go full on towards that. So just realizing in those quiet moments that, okay, God, this is your plan. If I truly want to do your will, then I'm going to be quiet and try to seek your will. And I find that dependence comes through in times that I get fatigued from maybe having too many Zoom calls in a day, maybe trying to push through and create too much content in a day, trying to push through and create a keynote, all of those kind of things. And I start to realize when I come to the edge of myself, the end of myself, realizing that, as Paul says, it's Christ's power that works in me that really gives me strength. So that's kind of how I wrap my head around the dependence piece. And I don't know about you, but when it seems like the more it becomes about me, the more God reminds me that it's about Him.
Yes, I think that's such a true and brilliant way to look at things because I mean, I recently, only very recently, came to the conclusion that even though a lot of my projects, someone looks at my life or looks at my CV and will say, okay, that's all focused on God. Sometimes when I actually honestly try to reflect on it, and as you say, be still, and there's this beautiful psalm which says, be still and know that I am God. I'll be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted in the earth. I think that's such a beautiful verse from the Bible. But sometimes I look at myself and I'm like, well, actually, you know what? I'm presenting outwardly that I'm really focused on God, but actually in my deep heart, I'm focusing so much on myself. I'm trying to push myself, and it's not that pushing yourself is wrong, but rather that your heart is just in the wrong place, and it's not truly, I guess, returning back to the true calling of Christ. And perhaps one of the last questions for our discussion about kind of the Christian walk, though of course it's never really the last question because as Christians, Christianity flows through everything that we do and everything that we say. But what are some main lessons for leadership that you've learned from the Bible?
Yeah, certainly. If you the whole servant leadership part, that's a huge part. Jesus talked about those who would be first should be last, and those who want to be leaders really. There's a book called Leaders Eat Last, and it's true that the more it becomes about us and putting us in the forefront and having the spotlight on us, the more it's doomed to fail. So, servant leadership, serving your people, loving your people is a huge one. Um, Asking the question, what does love require of me? So, in any situation that I'm in, what does love require of me? So, I'm part of a missional group called Many Hands, and we do ministry in Haiti and in Abaco in the Bahamas. And we see all these problems and we see these things that seem insurmountable. And instead of trying to fix them, asking God, what does love require of me? Because love was the major commandment that He shared with us. Love God, love others, also love ourselves. Those things are really important. And and the third one I would say probably is that it is more blessed to give than receive. We are in a society that focuses on receiving. What can I get? How can I win? All of that. But really, it's in those moments where we give of ourselves to other people that I think we find that we are living the life that God wants us to live.
Brilliant. And that idea of giving is something which I've realized as I'm kind of developing in my YouTube path and also the kind of the entrepreneurial side that I do on the side. One of the other mentors that I reach out to always says you have to give, and then you'll slowly see results. But those results should not be a result of you wanting those results, but rather you should be providing value. And I think that message of constantly giving is something which is so important. And perhaps tying on to what we've said and in a kind of a leeway or a movement into our next part of this interview, you talked a lot about how your desire to prove yourself, the desire to kind of demonstrate to others that you're not necessarily not enough, but rather you're more than enough in some sense, was something which was a massive driving force. And I suppose one of the questions that I want to raise to that is, well, what do you think are some of the positives and negatives from that? Because I know a lot of people, and perhaps even me myself in the past, where I'm thinking about, well, what got me, or at least what helped me really develop in my academics, and a lot of that was my desire to prove myself, I guess. And that was a very strong driving force, which I think without that, perhaps me as a teenager of like 19 years old or 16 years old, I would not have been able to find that motivation to actually push myself that hard. So I guess, where do you think the line is drawn between where that desire to prove yourself is a positive thing and when it goes into kind of a negative, toxic impact?
Yeah, that's great. And I really only realized that within the last 5 years or so. And I don't mourn the past at all. I don't. And I feel like God has, so I strongly believe that God does not allow bad things to happen. It's not like I did something wrong, so God is smiting me for that. I don't believe that. I believe we live in a broken, sinful world, but I do believe that God can redeem anything that has happened to us. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in my life. So I do not mourn how hard I pushed. I do not mourn that I got burnt out multiple times. And it was bad when I was burned out. And I don't mourn any of that. And the pushing and the achieving and all of that has brought me some great things in my life. One of those benefits is that I can see patients 3 days a week and then work on my message the other days because I have worked so hard over the 20 years that I've been a dentist. So I think it is one of those things that we just have to revisit on a regular basis. Spend some time in quiet, set some good goals. I think goals are amazing, but also not just those mountaintop goals, but waypoint goals along the way. And then actually celebrate some of those accomplishments as we get along the way. I would get to the top of the mountain. I'd be up there for about 2 minutes, look around. I'd get to a finish line. And then within an hour, I was planning the next event. So I think when you find yourself in that mentality that of just the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, we have to slow down a little bit and figure out why. But it's taken me most of my life to figure that out. And it's one of the things that I love to work with people as they're in a similar boat, that success hasn't really brought them what they hoped it would. And now they're feeling burned out and conflicted. And we try to sort all of that out and see, okay, what is it we're really trying to live for? How do we really get to that life that we don't want to wake up from, and that life that we don't want to vacation from? So I think there's not a cookie cutter approach to that. I think it's taking each person holistically and trying to figure out what they want to get out of life, what is their why, and how can we move forward without that constant hamster wheel rat race.
That's a really interesting approach, and I suppose I would ask a question while I'm playing the devil's advocate here, and perhaps someone might look at that and say, well, actually, someone should only take it slow once they've reached a certain level of success, but rather before they've reached that level of success, they should be forcing themselves to consistently try to reach the next mountain until they get to a certain level, and then there they can kind of slow down a bit. What do you think about that approach, or that kind of counter suggestion to how one should view that burnout and that thought process?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you this, I've done anything but slow down. So I have, while I am fewer hours in my office, I'm actually working more hours a week than what I was. But I am full on working in my purpose, and it's energizing and it's exciting. So there's a difference between achievement for the sake of achievement, nose to the grindstone, no breaks, working most of the weekend. There's a difference between that and working hard within your purpose and within how God wants you to work. So again, this is really tricky because there isn't just a perfect situation for all of us together. It's very individualized, and I think we find out that we have gone too far when we start to show some of the signs of burnout. And when we're just feeling like our life, which should be colorful and exciting and vibrant, when it kind of goes gray, that's one of the first signs that we really need to say, okay, what's going on here? What do we need to add back into life or subtract from life so that life can start to look a little bit more colorful again?
Mhm. That's a brilliant position, and we've started talking a bit about the signs of burnout. What would you say are some of the biggest signs or biggest indicators that you are approaching that level of burning out? Because I guess it's sometimes those things where I'll find myself at a certain level, I think I'm working well, and all of a sudden I just collapse. I'm like, okay, I think I'm probably already burnt out. What are some signs to say, okay, I'm almost nearing that edge, and how do I know that, and how do I kind of avoid it?
Yeah, so there's some physical signs. Get just feeling stress bubbling up. So just not feeling like you can relax at all. Getting reactive with the people who are important to you. If you go from being a good listener to kind of spouting off reactions really quick, If you look at your to-do list and become paralyzed by it and just want to retreat to your phone, if you just feel like everything in life is insurmountable, if you are starting to have sleep changes, appetite changes, some of those can mean bigger things as well. But when you look at all of those things and you say, okay, I used to be really productive. Now I can certainly make a list, but then I can't seem to do anything with it. That's a huge sign. And these are some of the things that we want to catch when it's early, so that it doesn't get to the point where I was at, which was heart palpitations, literally lying awake for the whole night, with my head spinning, panic attacks, chest pains, all of those kind of bigger things. So if we can be self-aware enough to know that these things aren't normal for me, life isn't exciting, it's dull, I don't want to do anything, I'm not motivated, then we can start to try to understand why, and then push that burnout back a little bit.
Mm. So perhaps let's say one of the listeners is experiencing that, or at least are showing some of these signs of burnouts. What are some things that they can do immediately to kind of confront it? Is it always about kind of changing a certain habit that they're doing in their life, or should they be seeing a doctor, or what type of things should someone be looking towards if they're starting to feel these symptoms?
Yeah, I think number one is being honest with yourself. It's okay. Earlier, I said that not everyone can get burnt out. And I do believe that is true, because there's a certain percentage of the population that are always going to be couch sitters. That's all they're going to do. They're going to go in, punch a clock, come home, sit on the couch, stream whatever's on, go to sleep, get up the next day. They're never going to step outside of that comfort zone. They're never going to push themselves. So I think some of those people are never going to be able to be burned out. They might feel exhausted with life, but it's going to be something different. So one of the things, and I get asked this all the time, so I created a 5 days to knock back burnout challenge that I have on my website. It's completely free, and you can go and sign up for that. All it takes is an email, and then you'll get a series of emails that you can read through, with a couple exercises in there for you to do, to try to gather some of that self-awareness, to try to push back burnout a little bit, to make crushing feeling that the walls are closing in, that there's no way out, and this is as good as life is going to get.
Brilliant. So I think that's a good presentation of burnout. Perhaps developing that a bit further, and you talk about burnout being a core part of that WintheNow journey. What were some other reasons which made you embark on this WintheNow journey, and what your current project is moving towards?
Yeah. So, COVID messed us all up. It threw us all for a loop. I don't know anybody who didn't get disrupted by COVID. So, when COVID happened, my dental office was closed for 8 weeks, and I wasn't able to see patients. And so I knew that, and it happened to be a time when I was incredibly burned out. And so what I did, I kind of to go a little bit against the norm of how people do things, I said, okay, as long as my dental practice is closed, I am going to commit to 30 minutes of quiet every day. I am going to sit in quiet and do that. And it was a huge failure at the beginning. I think day one, I looked at my watch about 45 seconds into it, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to do it. But I was consistent with it. I would set an alarm on my phone and try to just be quiet and see what I heard. And one of the things I realized is that I was not living my life in the present. My life was very gray. I was coming home from work and everything was still spinning in my head from work. I wasn't very present with my family. I wasn't present around the dinner table. I wasn't present with my friends. My head was always spinning about work and what was next and all of those kind of things. So after spending a lot of quiet, originally the phrase that came to me was win the day. And there's a lot of people who have talked about win the day. The thing that I like about win the now is when on a day that I see patients, I may have 30 patient interactions in a day. And if I count interactions with my team, I may have 40 or more interactions with people in a day. It's easy to look at that day and reduce it to the worst thing that happened in the day. So I'd come home and my wife would say, "How was your day?" And I would say, "Oh, this happened," instead of looking at the day as a whole. So win the now is all about being present in the current moment. And in the current moment, what does a win look like? So for this time that we're together, a win looks like you and I having a great conversation where we're listening well to each other, responding well to each other, adding value to the listeners, and giving people next steps. I have a busy day of meetings today, so I'm going to step into the next now after this. I have another meeting. Then I have about an hour of open time. So what does a win look like in that time? Well, I need to work on my newsletter that goes out next week. I need to work on a couple of other things. And then when I get done with my day, I'm going to I'll have dinner with my wife. And that will look like, a win will look like listening well to her, asking good questions to her, and then her asking me back and us just sharing life together. So we can have a loss. We certainly can. We can have a bad moment. Something bad can happen. It happens all the time. But what I will get in the habit of doing, I always have a piece of paper or my note app in my phone. And if I take a loss, I'll just make a note of that. And then I will, if I have time, I'll try to figure out what I can learn from that. If I can learn from something from that, then it becomes a win and it's not a loss anymore. And if I have to revisit it later, if it's kind of running around in my head, then I can go back and say, okay, this happened. How can I turn that into a win? And so then I come home and we talk about our day, and I'm more likely to talk about the wins than I am about the losses because I was present in all the moments and not just hung up on one of those losses.
That's a very interesting point you raise, especially about living in the present. And I think it's something which almost univocally is shared among most of my friends at Oxford. And I mean, most people here are extremely kind of that extremely driven, highly pushing themselves a lot of times. And they're either thinking about this essay, next week's essay, or the second essay they have to write this week. I mean, after this, I have to go do a tutorial, then write another essay for tomorrow. So, I mean, it's kind of that mentality that you're always in thinking about what's going on in the future. And I guess there's a slight difference perhaps between people who are struggling to find themselves in the present and people who are burnt out, even though a lot of times those share the same symptoms, I guess. I was wondering, what are some things that students or people could do who are of that high achieving kind of mentality to make them live in the present a bit more?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can do is give yourself the gift of knowing what you're going to do with time. And what I mean by that is getting really good at time blocking. So, okay, you have your essay, you have these things that you have to do. Okay, let's put it on the calendar. From this time to this time, I'm going to be working on the essay. From this time to this time, I'm going to be working on my next presentation. From this time to this time, I'm going to be working on the podcast. And when you do that, when you have that time, instead of what I call free range time is great, but it doesn't really lead to productivity. If we have things that we need to do, get them scheduled out. And then we find that we're a little bit less worried about them. At least I do, because it's not, oh man, I have all these things to do and I have this amount of time. Which one do I work on? Well, it's easy to get paralyzed and pick up my phone and zone out. If you give the gift of knowing what you're going to do with your time, that has changed my life. Instead of, and I need to do all these things, I don't know when I'm going to do it, my head is spinning with all these tasks. Sometimes I just need to do what's called a brain dump. And that is taking a piece of paper and just writing down every single thing that's running around in my head. And then circling the 2 or 3 things that are the most important, and then making sure I go to work on those. So I think those are a couple things that can turn that spinning head of what's next into how can I actually attack those things and make them not seem like the mountains are as big.
That's a very brilliant presentation of how to live in the present. And one of the verses which came to mind when you were when you were presenting just now was, "Look at the birds of the air; they do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. For each day has enough trouble on its own." And I guess in a more reduced sense, in your time block, just focus on that time block and focus on what you have to do in that present moment is something which I think is very helpful and a very helpful piece of advice. You've talked also a bit about your hiking and your kind of that journey of what you've learned from hiking and climbing mountains. What is the story behind not finding what you were looking for at the top of the mountain?
Yeah, so I think it was always that that next mountain. Almost, you could call it a next mountain syndrome. I was never content with my accomplishments, so I have done two Ironman triathlons, and I crossed the finish line of the first one, and I was, even during the race, I was thinking of what the next one was going to be, and that's that's not living in the moment. That's Well, here, let me give you this example. So Netflix, which I think most people are familiar with, had a story about a guy who climbed all of the 8,000-foot peaks in the world. I think it's called 14 Peaks is what it's called. So he climbed all of those in a record amount of time. And they interviewed him at the end and they said, "What's next?" And he said, "On to bigger and better things. We're going to go bigger. We're going to go bigger." And I thought, you've been to the tallest places in the world. What is bigger and better than that? How can you get more than that? Are you going to climb a mountain on the moon? I'm not sure. So I think that is the same syndrome that we can all fall into, is that problem of, oh man, I've reached the top. I need to find another top. I need to find another top. And no matter what you do, someone is going to have more than you. Someone's going to have more house. Someone's going to have more cars. Somebody's family is going to seem like they have it more put together. There's a point where we have to find the balance of staying hungry and pushing in our purpose versus finding some contentment. Uh, Ultimately, peace is found in contentment. And I am going to be somebody who's going to try to live out my why for the rest of my life. So I'm not somebody who's going to become complacent. I'm not somebody who, I believe retirement is going to involve sitting on a beach and sipping cocktails all the time. I am going to want to live a life of purpose my whole life. But some of that is going to be finding some contentment moments where I don't feel like I need to just keep climbing.
You present about a lot about contentment and that feeling of just being at peace. I guess what is so difficult to do in the world today is to kind of figure out how contentment is combined with happiness, and whether those two things are the same or not. Because when you're thinking about contentment, there's a lot about, I guess, tying it to purpose and fulfilling your purpose. But at the same time, sometimes happiness, at least the way it's presented in social media or by people on, like, influencers online, they don't seem to necessarily be really acting out of that place of contentment, I guess. And I don't know any of those people myself, so perhaps they are, but I guess there seems to at least be an ephemeral kind of, or at least a superficial obvious difference between the two. So perhaps can you elaborate a bit more about the difference between perhaps a hedonistic lifestyle or a pursuit of happiness and that pursuit of contentment?
Yeah, the World Economic Machine says that if I have this, I will be happy. If I go here, I will be happy. Those influencers that we see on social media are mostly not content. They're mostly not happy. They are stuck in that same, oh, the next thing will get me there. The next thing will get me there. The next thing will get me there. And we focus so much on what we don't have. And when we're focused on what we don't have, then we are not going to be content. If we're focused on what we have, and I think this is where gratitude comes into play in a huge way. I love that in the U.S. we're heading towards the week of Thanksgiving, and one of the exercises I love to do with my family is that we would make a list with my wife and my two sons. We would make a list of all the things that we were thankful for around Thanksgiving. There was a time that we even pushed it to try to come up with a list of 100 things. And I think when we start to really look at gratitude, we start to lean into contentment a little bit more, because gratitude cannot exist in the same place that worry exists. Gratitude cannot exist in the same place as anxiety exists. So if our heads are really spinning and we're overwhelmed, I think one of the best things that we can do is just make a list of things that we're grateful for in our lives. Relationships, passing a test or doing well on an essay that we just handed in, having a place to sleep, having a job. There's a lot of things that we can focus on, and if we can focus on what we have and not only on what we don't have, then that path to happiness and contentment is going to be a lot shorter. And happiness is certainly not a destination; it's a journey. So what works for happiness now might not work for happiness even an hour from now or next week. So it's having that attitude of gratitude and having those discussions with other people, I think definitely leads more to contentment.
Brilliant. And I guess you've raised a very brilliant example of how to be grateful. You listed out and write about the things that you're being grateful for. I guess developing on that, what are some other ways in which someone can search for contentment and demonstrate their gratitude?
Yeah. So in building on that, one other time I had a coaching client that I worked on that I worked with, and she was so stressed. She had some really big things going on in her life. And I challenged her to exhaust her gratitude. And that was to just spend a good chunk of time and write down every single possible thing that she could be grateful for until she couldn't think of anything else. And that was a powerful thing for her to do, to be able to really kind of push that out of the way. But other things that we can do is just quiet. And I know that I've said that a couple times already, but quiet is so important in that. I think movement is really important when we kind of get stuck and stagnant. Just even taking a walk around the block, being outside in nature, having a chance to just pause and take a few deep breaths. Sometimes when I have back-to-back meetings, I just have to take 2 minutes and close my eyes and just take some really deep breaths to bring myself back to the moment and kind of create a boundary between those two events and say, okay, this was done. Now it's time to get ready for this one. So those are a couple super easy, free, basic things that you can do to kind of calm yourself down, so to speak.
That's a really wonderful way to learn about how to express and understand what you are grateful for. Perhaps to end off this video, and I guess it's a question which perhaps wraps off everything we've discussed so far. We live in a very results-driven world, and we've identified that finding that contentment in life is just so important, and how that contentment is tied up with the idea of purpose. How do you find purpose in a results-driven world, and how does that impact the way you're meant to go forward? I guess for people who are watching this, how could they go forward from this interview?
Yeah, I think focus on your impact. That's one of the biggest things that you can do is how am I going to influence the world that I live in? How am I going to influence my people, my family, and my friends? Another one is focusing on having great relationships. COVID told us that we needed to be alone, that we needed to be isolated, that we were toxic to other people. We are better together. We are meant to be in relationships. So focusing on those relationships, finding joy and contentment in those, on those, being business owners. It is really easy to focus on numbers, and we have to pay attention to numbers. But focusing on our people, how can we pour into our people? How can we bless them? How can we empower our people to live out their purpose? When we have a whole organization full of people who are living out their purpose, then we have a pretty unstoppable force. And I would just end by saying that I don't think we survive, or okay, we can survive. I don't think we thrive without quiet spaces in our lives and quality relationships. So those are two of the biggest things. When when we're only focused on us, then we become focused on results really quickly. But when we become focused on our people and our impact, um, then I believe we receive bigger blessings.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on this channel. I'm sure people who've watched it have learned a lot from this interview. I definitely have learned a lot from this about how I could apply some of these lessons to my life. If you want to learn more about Eric's work, then you can check out his website, which is here. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Eric, before we end off, is there any other platforms or places where they can find or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so my website is definitely my home base. I'm also on LinkedIn, try to post some good things there. But definitely check out the Knockback Burnout Challenge. That's a big deal, I think, and just just have faith that if we take a few steps and really step into this mindset of presence, that good days are going to be ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on this channel once again. It's a great privilege to have you on. Stay safe, my friends. If you enjoyed this interview and want more interviews, then make sure to like and subscribe. And let me know your thoughts about this interview in the comment below. Stay safe. See you soon. Thank you for watching. And God bless. I'll see you next one.